In this lecture, we'll be using our rig to pose our character into natural standing poses. Okay, so here's where we got up to last time. And whilst this rig is a reasonably effective rig to use, it does have its limitations in terms of optimum usability. And like I say, we'll move on to a Rigify rig later on so you can see what it's like to use a really detailed and complex rig. But for now, I want you to have a go using this rig to see how it feels and to find out some of those limitations for yourself so you can really see the benefits of the more complicated rigs. Now, we also want to practice our animation. And as I talked about before, your first step to animating a character is finding the key poses. So we'll practice doing some basic poses now. So we'll start off together and set the scene up. I need to bring my timeline up a bit. I'll zoom out a touch so I can see the whole character. Select the bones, go into pose mode with Control Tab, and we're ready to set up a pose. I'll press the record button so it records my bones movement, and we'll start with our first pose on frame 1. So your first pose challenge is to make this character look like they're a bit more relaxed in a standing up pose. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so it seems fairly obvious that we need the arms down by the side, so I'll rotate by the local Z axis so the arm comes perfectly down. It doesn't matter too much if you chose to use the global Y. It should be roughly the same as the Z, and I'll do the same for the other side. Now you can actually use the mirror option, and I could have done that while moving this bone. However, it's nice to have a little bit of asymmetry to your characters. So R, Z, Z, and move that down, and that can be slightly different. Now they look a little bit standing to attention at the moment, so I feel like maybe bringing the main hip bone back very slightly, so G then Y, and then a slight more lean forwards like this, and then we'll have to bring the head up slightly. And this time I won't use the local Z axis or X axis for these bones, as again, a little bit of asymmetry makes it seem more natural. Okay, so we've got a bit more of a relaxed pose, but the arms now look too far back. So I'll select both those and R then X. So that's the global X axis this time. So I can move them both forwards. And that's looking a bit better, but still quite rigid. But it's often the case that students will do exactly this pose as a relaxed pose. There's nothing wrong with it. And we'll set the keyframes for this one, and that can be pose 1. Don't panic if your pose looks slightly different to mine. Well done if you shifted the hip weight to one side, because that's much more natural. I'm going to select all and press I to insert a location and rotation keyframe to make sure that all my bones are keyframed in this one position. I'll move across to frame 20 and then we'll start our next pose. Now before we move any further, you may be finding that it's a little bit tough to see our mesh through all the bones. It's a little bit confusing. So it would be useful to have a second window where we don't have the bones in and we just see the character in its pose. Well, let's actually go across to the animation workspace for this. There we have the camera set up and we have our viewport set up with the overlays enabled. That's the overlays up here which show us our bones, and you'll notice on the setup over here we have the overlays turned off, which you can see there. Now this isn't a particularly good view, so I'll come out of camera view with 0 on my numpad and zoom in so we can actually see our character a bit more. And we'll just view from the front for the moment, somewhere around there. The other thing about the animation workspace is that we jump to the dope sheet and we've got our timeline right at the bottom here. I'll press N to get rid of the side panel there because we don't need it. And let's think about the next pose. Here's an image from Pexels, and this is from RDNE Stock Project. And all the images I'm going to use are copyright free. They're available with this lecture to download, but you don't need to download them. But looking at this person's weight is shifted across to one side, so they're carrying most of their weight on their left leg, and the right leg is more as a balancing leg, taking much less of the weight. The same is true for this image here. They're leaning over. There may be a bit of camera distortion here as well, but they're leaning over. Most of the weight is on one leg. Same with this one. They're a bit more upright, but once again, most of the weight is on one side, and there's a kind of balancing leg taking, let's say, 30% of the weight. And this is true for most poses. So let's use this one as our example. Again, this is from RDNE Stock Project on Pexels. So if you've got two monitors, you might want to put this on a second monitor so you can see it. For me, I'm going to bring it into Blender so we can see it easily. So I'll have to go into object mode for this. So Control Tab into object mode, find the folder with that file. And if I click and drag it in now, you can see it comes in perpendicular to the camera. So it's a little bit off. So I'll undo that and I'll go to front view first and then I'll drag it in. Just makes it a little bit easier. Actually, this is the one I wanted to drag in, so we'll choose that one. And I'll just place it next to the other one. So it comes in as an empty, so it won't be rendered with the file. I'll just scale it down with the normal keys, so S to scale, so it's next to our character here, just like this. Now what I don't want you to do is put this directly behind your character and copy the pose. I want you to look at the pose and try and recreate it on the character rather than just lining up to a background image. It's better for the sake of practice and understanding. So I'll go across to frame 20, select our armature into pose mode. I'll go to front view, zoom in a bit, and I want to give you the challenge of setting up this pose on our character. You don't need to spend too long on this, we're just trying to roughly recreate it. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so hopefully you got an okay with that. The first thing we need to do is get the character to lean across slightly more. So I'll select that backbone there, back to front view and G then X, and move it across. Quite a lot of lean on this one. And the person's center is actually over the top of this foot. It's a very big lean. It may be a little bit of camera distortion there as well. So I'm going to go a little bit further even. So it's just over the top of this foot here. This leg is starting to pick up because it's so far across. The feet are much closer together. So I'll select the control bone here and G then X to move that closer. Notice when I press G then X, that moves it closer to the ground. Don't worry too much about the root bone at the moment. That's not important. I'll just zoom into the feet to make sure that's on the ground and that looks good. So we've got the position, we need to sort out the leg posture now. So first of all, let's grab our pole and move that across, so G then X. So the knee is facing outwards, like this one here, and this one needs to go the other way, so G then X, move that across. That's great, but that's not rotating our feet, so I need to select the foot bone, R then Z, to move that around the Z, and this one as well, R then Z, to move that around the Z. Now I'm noticing they're a little bit close together, so I'll just move this one out very slightly. So G then X to move that across, and we're a bit closer there to our character just there. We might want to adjust the lean slightly more if we want to be perhaps a little bit more precise, so going across even more, somewhere around there perhaps. So the pose is looking quite good. The final touch then, R then Z. We've got that face looking in a different direction, maybe down a little bit, so I'll just press rotate, and you can see it move, looking down a little bit there. And we've got our pose, which is fairly close to what we've got in our picture here. The one thing that's missing is the arm posture. So I'll try and sort that out now. I'll just move back around here so I can get more of a picture. And perhaps not this bone actually. Perhaps we need to slump the shoulders a bit more, so the clavicle. So I'll just press R to rotate to slump that down a bit more, which means we need to move these ones outwards as we do that. And then these ones are forward slightly. We might want to R, Y, Y to give that a bit of rotation forwards. So the wrist turns inwards, as it is in the photo here. And let's just come around to the front and see if we're overlapping our mesh just a little bit there. So we'll move the arm out very slightly. And that's got quite a natural look to it now. There may be a little bit more of this coming forwards. Can't help but want to get this a bit more precise, and this one as well. I'll press R then Z to move that forwards. There's often more of a relaxed slouch to the shoulders like this when standing relaxed. Obviously we can't do the hands in the pockets, so I think that's far enough. Okay, so hopefully you got an okay with that, and you might want to spend a little bit of time now maybe filling in the bits that you missed and kind of catching up with me. And to complete, you should have two poses, one at frame 20 and one at frame 0. And we can compare the two. This one looks a lot more relaxed, and I'll use the jump to keyframe. This one looks a lot more forced, and we'll see those two again. Relaxed, forced, and I'll hope you agree this one is a lot better. So hopefully you can see from that as well that using references like this makes a big difference, and studying people and their poses in photographs and in real life can be very helpful to really practicing your craft of animation. So as I say, make sure you've caught up with me, and in the next lecture we'll do a little bit more of this practice.